Perfect.
Be pausing. I will be pausing at a couple of points deliberately in order to invite questions and comments. So at that point, I certainly will be grateful for your help. Well, I want to say a sincere word of thanks to everyone for permitting me, inviting me to be with you during Lent to explore this really important existential topic, the mystery of death, the meaning of resurrection. We have entered into the season of Lent, and on Ash Wednesday, the pastor or the priest imposes the ashes on the forehead of those who follow Christ on this journey, and he or she says the words, memento homo, quia pulvis est, et in pulverem reverteris. And the Latin scholars in the room can help me translate. Remember, human being, that you are dust, and to dust you will return. So with that reminder ringing in our ears of our own mortality, the fact that there is an encounter with death and with the mystery of resurrection in the future for each of us individually, I invite you on this journey. Now, I would like to begin the journey in a very personal way, and I hope you will not find that inappropriate. Some of us lost friends and family members during the terrible pandemic that swept over us in the last 2 years.
Who's that?
Very Welborn. Dr. Welborn.
The members of my own family were spared the pandemic, but in the last few years, I lost both my father and my mother to cancer. My dear wife, Diane, lost her mother in April of 2021, and she lost both of her dear uncles and 2 of her dearest aunts. And with those kind of experiences in the last few years, I think I found it important for us to take this journey together. The mystery of death, the meaning of resurrection. Now, I want to make clear that I will not be offering a theology of death. At the end of our class today, I will recommend a book by a profound scholar, a Jesuit scholar, as it turns out, with the title, The Mystery of Death, and the subtitle, The Awakening to Eternal Life. But that will not be my focus. Instead, I invite you to think with me about the fact of our mortality, the inevitability of death for each of us, and then how we respond to it in grief and in hope. And beyond that, we will explore together the meaning of resurrection. This belief, this hope that was so crucial to the first Christians, but so difficult for people today, 2,000 years after the resurrection of Jesus, so difficult for modern people to understand. So that is the agenda for our course. And as I said, I want to make a very personal beginning, and I hope it will not be received as inappropriate. I was present in the room when my own dear mother passed on. She had been drifting in and out of consciousness in a light coma for several days. And then on a Sunday afternoon, at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she woke up. She opened her eyes wider than I have ever seen a human being's eyes open. And she looked at me and at my sisters standing beside me, and she said, "I love you." And her head dropped, and she was gone. About 30 minutes later, the ambulance arrived from the funeral home, and they took away her poor little body. A few days later, we stood beside her grave, and we witnessed to the meaning of the resurrection. We said together the words of the creed, "I believe in the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come." So it is that great mystery, and it is the meaning of our hope, that I invite you to explore, all of us together, in the coming weeks. I began my own journey into this topic in the first year, Larry Hofsis, of my seminary education at Yale Divinity School. My first New Testament course there was with a wonderful, kind-hearted, brilliant professor from Dayton, Ohio. His name was Rowan Greer, and you may know his younger brother, the lawyer, David Greer of Beezer, Greer, and Landis. He still lives in Dayton, down in the Oregon district. Well, his older brother was my first teacher in early Christian literature at Yale. And together with him and the other students, I began to work on an essay on a passage from the Apostle Paul's first epistle. It is the text in the New Testament that we call 1 Thessalonians. It is the oldest surviving Christian letter. It is the earliest textual evidence for the Jesus movement. And in chapter 4, verses 13 to 18, Paul addresses the deep wound of a person in the Christ group at Thessalonica who had died. If the metaphors that Paul uses in the letter are to be taken seriously, it appears that the important individual whose death has brought grief upon the Thessalonian Christians was a woman, evidently the matriarch of the group. And Paul begins his message of consolation with the words, I don't want you to be unaware. I don't want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, that concerning those who have died, we ought not to grieve like the others, that is, the non-Christians who have no hope. Now, colleagues, when I read that passage, I wondered, is Paul telling us the truth? Is he accurately describing the hopelessness with which Greek and Roman people before the birth of Christianity looked into the face of death? Were they really hopeless? And the other possibility is that Paul is simply expressing a Jewish and Christian prejudice, that from his point of view, the pagans are hopeless. And this puzzled me. I made an appointment with my professor, the Daytonian Rowan Greer, and I shared with him my puzzlement. I think he could tell that there was something personal going on with me. And so he asked, Larry, why are you so deeply invested in this question of the attitude of people toward death, grief, and hopelessness in the face of death? And so, because my professor was kind, I shared with him the grief that I was suffering. Not long, Larry Hofsus, before I enrolled at Yale Divinity School, I lost one of the dearest people in the world to me, my grandfather, an old country doctor. In fact, until I met that beautiful redhead to whom I'm married, my grandfather was the dearest person in the world to me, the only person who I thought loved me with his whole heart, unreservedly. And so his death was a trauma for me. It was a crisis of faith. And I shared that with my professor. I said, frankly, I think I'm depressed, and I don't have $150 to pay a psychologist to help me deal with my depression. And it was then that my wonderful professor said to me, Larry, if you will come here to my office every Thursday afternoon for the rest of the semester, you and I will translate together Greek and Latin tombstones. And in that way, we will explore the attitude that people had in the face of death. Were they hopeless? How deep did the wound of grief, how deep did it go into the hearts and minds of the Apostle Paul's contemporaries? And so, class, I took him up on his offer. Every Thursday afternoon, I appeared at the door of Rowan Greer's office, and we took down from the shelf big, fat volumes of Greek and Latin inscriptions, tombstones, and together we translated them. Now, what I would like to share with you this morning is a selection of the tombstones that I translated that semester with Rowan Greer. And so I'm going to ask our wonderful team of technical assistants to share the screen so that everyone joining by Zoom at home and anyone there present can look at these tombstone inscriptions. They will allow us to judge for ourselves whether Greeks and Romans in the time of Paul were, for the most part, hopeless in the face of death. So can we bring up the tombstones?
Greek and Roman.
That is,
That it? We lost.
no.
Well, where's
Well,
that? Is it?
did we lose it?
There you are.
Sharing screen. Oh, did you hit share?
Yeah.
Share. There we go.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted you to see. Now, friends and colleagues, these are my translations, very literal translations. The first one is the most frequently occurring tombstone inscription in the ancient world. It is found in both Greek and Latin. The Greek version says, "Uk emein, gegonin, umelemoi, hobios tauta," which translates, "I was not, I came into existence, I will not be in the future, such is life." Now, that inscription occurs more frequently on Greek and Roman tombstones than any other. It was so ubiquitous that it was eventually reduced to a 4-letter abbreviation, like our what? RIP, like our rest in peace. I don't see much hope there. It looks to me that Paul is telling us the truth. Look at the second one. The second one is inscribed on the tombstone of a young man who died when he was away from home. He was traveling in the north of Greece. As you can see on ancient tombstones, the dead speak to the living. And that's what we have here. The young man says, "My mother, leave off lamenting. Cease to mourn and cut yourself." Why? Why should she stop grieving? Look at the last sentence. Hades, the god of the underworld, does what? Turns pity aside. There is no point in grieving, mother, because the God of the dead is not moved by your tears. Hades does not care. Look at the third. The third tombstone inscription is in the form of a little dialogue. The grieving person speaks first, and he says to the departed one who is lying in the grave, he says, "Oh, dear one, what is down there?" In Latin, "O carida tita nerthe." And then the dead person answers, "Paluskotos," much darkness. And then the living person asks, and what about the road up to the stars, to the heavens? And the dead person answers, pseudos. It's a lie. And the living person then asks, and what about Pluto, the god of the dead? And the dead person answers, muthos. He's a myth. And then the living person draws the conclusion, apolometha, we are destroyed. Well, as you can see, it would appear that Paul is telling us the truth, that he is accurately reporting the attitudes with which his Greek and Roman contemporaries confronted death. Look at the fourth one. This is a Latin one. It begins like this: soles occidere et redire possunt. Latin students, suns set and are able to rise. And then it continues, nobi simo brevis lux, but when our brief light goes under, occideret, look at the next phrase, nox est perpetua, night is perpetual, una dormienda, one sleep. Wow, that is hopeless, isn't it? Suns rise, suns set and are able to rise, but our brief light, when it is extinguished, night is perpetual, one sleep. Look at the last one. Again, a young man tells his family, stop grieving. Why? Because there is nothing more. Having died, ude segere, no one rises. Now, class, I spent the whole semester translating tombstones like this. I could have given dozens and dozens of examples. Only at the end of the semester, after I had worked so hard with my favorite teacher, did Rowan Greer reveal to me that there was a book in the library by a great American classics scholar named Richard Lattimore, the translator of Homer. The book is called Themes in Greek and Latin Epitaphs. And you can still buy that work. It's a cheap paperback on Amazon.com. And I want to quote the conclusion of his book after looking at hundreds of tombstones. And by the way, because the words that are on tombstones are inscribed upon the most durable material in the ancient world, there are more surviving tombstones than any other form of ancient Greek and Latin writing. And at the end of his book, Lattimore draws the conclusion. Listen to this. Among Greek, no, he starts off like this. He says, judging from the epitaphs among Greeks and Romans, belief in any kind of afterlife was not clear or strong. Wow. In the face of death, most ordinary Greeks and Romans were skeptical. Who knows? Who knows what comes after death? There is no clear hope in an afterlife. Now, next week, class, we will discover that the educated elite, people like Plato and Cicero, they believed in the immortality of the soul. But ordinary people were hopeless, evidently, in the face of death. And this is one of the ways in which the basic existential attitudes of people in the time of Jesus and Paul contrast most clearly with Americans today. In the latest poll that was taken by CBS News in the year 2014, 63% of Americans believe in some kind of afterlife. Of course, more people believe in heaven than those who believe in hell. But 63% believe in some kind of afterlife. And so, class, I think I have come to the conclusion that it was the new attitude toward death and what comes after death. It was the Christian message of the resurrection that was largely responsible for the attractiveness of the gospel message to Greeks and Romans in the cities around the Mediterranean basin. Christian evangelists like the Apostle Paul brought something new into their world, and it served to awaken hope. It reoriented people toward death. In order to illustrate the quality of grief among Paul's contemporaries, I wish I could take the whole group at Epiphany on a study trip. I wish we would organize something like this, Joan, someday, where all of us would fly to Athens and travel around the Mediterranean together. And one of the places that I would be sure to take you is to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. It is an enormous museum which contains hundreds of beautiful tombstones, sculpted bas-reliefs, and epitaphs. And there is nothing like walking through the galleries of that museum to bring you face to face with the poignancy of grief in the Greek and Roman world. And now, once again, can I ask our wonderful team there at Epiphany to display the next image? This is one of those bas-reliefs, one of those funeral monuments from the National Archaeological Museum. In fact, I think it is one of the most moving. We know the name of the artist. His name is Scopas, and he has depicted here on a tombstone a young man who has died in the prime of life. You see how he is pictured there, completely nude, overflowing with life and vitality. Do you see just to the left of his knee, a little servant boy is cringing, is curled up there at his feet, weeping at the death of his young master. And do you see down by his other knee the hunting dog, the faithful hunting dog that accompanied the young man in so many pursuits? The dog is also lost in grief. But the most vivid image is that of the aged father of the young man. He is depicted in profile, facing the young athlete, his son, who has died. Do you see where his right hand is? It's up here at his beard, pulling at his beard in a gesture of consternation. When my wife Diane and I visited the National Archaeological Museum for the first time, not long after I graduated from Yale Divinity School, we encountered this tombstone. In those days, and I think it is still the case, there was a red rope in front of this bas-relief that prohibited visitors to the museum from approaching the bas-relief too closely, so that no damage would be done to it. But looking at the old man in profile, you are unable to look fully into his face. You can't look into his eyes. And so when no one was looking, when the museum guards were in the other room, Diane, do you remember what I did? I stepped over the rope so that I could look back into the eyes of that aged father. And if I'm able to take the whole group at Epiphany to visit this museum someday, I will challenge you. I would say, if you have the courage and the fortitude to look fully into the face of grief, step over the rope. I don't think any artist has ever succeeded in capturing the medley of emotions that constitute grief, confusion, anger, desperation, loss, hopelessness. It is all there in the eyes of that old man. If I were able to walk with you all through the entire gallery in Athens, I would also take you to the bas-relief commemorating the death of a young woman who, like so many women in that time, died in childbirth. And on this tomb, the artist has depicted a woman, perhaps a midwife or a female family member, holding out to the young mother the infant whose birth was the cause of her death. And the most heartbreaking thing about the bas-relief is that the little infant is reaching out with his right hand to touch his mother's face. I have to tell you, class, all those years ago in the early 1980s, I stood in front of that sculpture and wept. Yeah, I don't know if the emotion of grief has the same power or poignancy across all cultures. I'm not competent to judge that, But what I can tell you is that I have never seen the emotion of grief depicted with such power as you see on Greek and Roman tombstones. Now, I want to pause at this moment just for a while, and I want to see if there are already questions or comments from our wonderful group. Those of you that have made these journeys with me over the years, ever since 1991 or 92, Larry Hofstas, when you invited me to Epiphany for the first time, you know that one of the greatest things about the adult education group at Epiphany is the quality of the insights, the depth of the spirit among our group. And that's why I'm always so happy to return and join you for more. So let me see at this point if there are questions or comments, and please ask Jim Durham to come forward and make sure that I hear the question clearly.
If you are watching at home and you have a question, you need to unmute your computer before you ask a question.
Anything in the room?
Yeah, I'll comment.
You want to step up and comment directly because Larry always likes to converse with you.
Okay.
John Beckman is coming up.
Greetings, Larry.
I see one of my best friends coming forward.
I was going to say, there's lots of cultures like the Scythians and the Egyptians and the Mayans and so forth who went to great efforts to put things in the grave for the benefit of people after they've died. So obviously there were portions of people throughout history who believed in an afterlife. They just didn't believe in the same one that we know about. You see it. I think today we have some people who just despair and they think, it's all over with, so why worry about it? And there are some of us who don't feel that way. I'm not sure if I have a question. I just more of a comment.
Your comment is a very good one. You're absolutely right. The pharaohs in Egypt, that is the kings and the queens, went to great expense to build pyramids that would guarantee them an afterlife. And the Scythians buried great treasures with their dead in the hope of an afterlife. But Paul is spreading his good news about the resurrection of Jesus, not in Egypt or in Scythia, but in Greece and in Asia Minor, among Greek and Roman people. And for that reason, I focused my research on those areas. And what we find there, I believe, is that Paul is accurately reporting the hopelessness and the deep grief of Greek and Roman people. I think the reason that the Greeks and the Romans, for the most part, were hopeless in the face of death is because they believed that only the gods were athanatoi, immortal. So the definition of the human being, one of the Greek words for a human being is thanatos. That is the one who dies, the mortal one. And so I think ordinary Greeks and Romans did not have any kind of hope for survival beyond death. And I think that was what made the message of evangelists like Paul so electrifying. But your observation is a very good one. Are there other comments, questions? Yes.
You want to step up?
Or Jim Overbrook.
Or I knew that John was going to talk.
Jesus from the cross said to two other people on crosses next to him, today you will be with me in paradise.
Yes.
And I find great comfort in that, in remembering my first wife as she died. And so could you comment on that at all as it applies to what we're doing today?
Absolutely. Jesus turned to the good thief on the cross who had spoken up in his defense, and he said, "This day you will be with me in paradise." So Jesus himself, in one of his last utterances, gave expression to a faith in the life hereafter and promised the thief that they would be together. If I can ask you, we are going to devote all of our attention in a couple of weeks to that very passage and to other passages in the Gospels that witness to the belief in the resurrection. Jews in the time of Jesus, some of them at least, believed in the resurrection and in the life of the world to come. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection, although the Sadducees did not. And we will have an opportunity in a couple of weeks to come back to the promise that Jesus made to the good thief and to explore more fully what it means for us today. So I will thank you for your good comment and ask you to wait for a couple of weeks.
I will. I'll be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we're good, Larry.
Other questions or comments?
I think we're good. Thanks. Wow. I think we're good. Thanks.
All right, good. Then I would like, with your help, to take the next step. That toward which Greeks and Romans in the time of Paul reached out in their grief was consolation. They wanted to hear the words, "Stop grieving. Death happens to everyone. Nothing can be done about it. Therefore, put your arms around each other. Comfort one another." By this time, it will not come as a surprise to you to learn that the most frequently occurring genre of literature in the ancient world, in the whole ancient world, there are more examples of letters of consolation than any other kind of writing. They survive in the thousands, and they cross the entire literary spectrum, from elegant essays written by philosophers like Seneca and politicians like Cicero to the humblest little papyrus sympathy notes. And now I would like to ask again for the help of our wonderful team there at Epiphany to bring up and to share on the screen an example of a letter of consolation that is written by a Greek woman to an Egyptian friend. And it is dated to the early 2nd century. This little letter is written on papyrus, a very cheap material, and it is found today in the Yale Rare Book Museum. I've actually seen it with my own eyes. When the letter comes up on the screen, you will see that on the right side of the screen is a facsimile reproduction of there it is, a facsimile reproduction of the little letter itself. It is about the size of what? A Post-it note. It's about the size of a Post-it note. And on this little note, a sympathy note, you will see that a Greek woman has written a letter of consolation to a grieving friend. The Greek text and the English translation is found on the left side of the page. And it is so short that we can read the whole thing. Irene to Tenophrus and Philo. Philo is the husband of Tenophrus. Good comfort. Now look at the next sentence. I am as sorry and weep over the departed one as I wept for Didymus. So evidently Irene, the author of this letter, has also lost a child. And now she writes to console a friend who has experienced a similar loss. Look how it continues. And all things whatsoever were fitting, I have done, and all of mine. She is referring to the rituals of mourning, the rituals of grief. And then she lists the members of her household who have joined her in the rituals of grief. And now look at the next sentence. But nevertheless, against such things, one can do what? Nothing. Therefore, comfort ye one another. Farewell. That's deeply moving, isn't it? Against such things, one can do nothing. Therefore, comfort one another. Now, what I would like to suggest, class, as we now return to Paul's epistle to the Thessalonians, chapter 4, I would like to suggest that Paul is creatively adapting the letter of consolation in what he writes to the Thessalonians. Look how it begins in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13. I don't want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, concerning those who have died. Literally, Paul says, those who have fallen asleep, that you sorrow or grieve not, like the others who have no hope. Now, the little Greek expression, me lupeste, stop grieving, stop mourning. Those words stare out at us from thousands of ancient tombstones. Many tombstones contain nothing more than those two words, stop grieving. So at the beginning of his consolation, Paul is reminding his readers of something that they have seen inscribed on tombstones every single day as they walk through the street. Now look at how he continues. Verse 14. For if we believe that Jesus died. Now, in Greek, Paul says, agar pisteuomen kai hoti Jesus apethanen. If we believe that even Jesus died. A few minutes ago, I told you that the most frequently occurring tombstone was the first one that we looked at today. I was not. I came into existence. I will not be in the future, such is life. But now, class, would you like to hear the second most frequently occurring tombstone? The second most popular inscription goes like this. In Greek, kai ho Herakles apethanen. Even Hercules died. Do you see how that works as a consolation? Who was Hercules? Hercules was the strongest of mortals. He was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman. And so the tombstone says, if even Hercules had to die, then why not you? Why not me? Now, can I show you what Paul is doing? How profound he is, how insightful Paul is as a psychologist of human emotion. Paul begins his message with the words, for if we believe that even Jesus died. Now, if you are sitting in Thessalonica and you are reading those words, you are saying to yourself, oh, I know what he's going to say. I have heard this before. If even Jesus had to die, then why not me? Why not you? But class, look at what happens next. In what follows, Paul introduces two little words that are found on no pre-Christian tombstone. The two little words are, and rose. For if we believe that even Jesus died and rose, in Greek, kai aneste. Can you say that with me? Kai aneste. I would submit, colleagues, that in those two words, the whole revolution of Christian hope has been condensed. And it is Paul's genius as a preacher and as a pastoral psychologist, Larry, that Paul brings about a sudden reversal within the field of expectations. Just when the Thessalonians think that they know what he is going to say, even Jesus died, why not you? Suddenly, he brings about a reversal. Jesus died and rose. And then he continues. So also, God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep. The resurrection of Jesus is a promise. He is the first fruit of a resurrection of the dead that will come for all who believe, for all who share the faith of Messiah Jesus. A little bit later in this paragraph, verse 17, after Paul has described how Jesus will return. He will descend from heaven with a word of command and the voice of the archangel and the trumpet of God. And then the dead in Christ will rise first. And then Paul adds, listen to this, then we, and I'm going to translate very literally, the ones living, literally, the ones left hanging around, hoi perilepomenoi, until the coming of the Lord, will be caught up, will be snatched up with them, that is, with the dead, in the clouds to a reunion with the Lord and our loved ones. And so we will always be together with them. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. That little verb that Paul uses to describe how we will be caught up, snatched up to a reunion, to a meeting with the loved ones that we have lost. It's the Greek verb harpazo. Once again, can you say that with me? Harpazo. Thank you. Can I tell you something? That verb appears frequently on Greek tombstones as a euphemism for death. A loved one was snatched away suddenly from the greatest life, snatched away from us. Class, can you see what Paul has just done? He has used a word which on the tombstones is a euphemism for death, and Paul has used it as a euphemism for life. Snatched up, snatched away to a reunion, an apantesis with our lost loved ones, and we will be together with them forever. Class, looking at the clock, let me close with these words, something that you might not be able to see in this little passage in 1 Thessalonians in the English translation, but it jumps out at you in Greek, are the great number of times that Paul repeats the words together and together with. He pushes those words into the sentence, even though it disturbs the syntax, the flow of the language. He is emphasizing that in the future we will be together with those whom we have lost to death. And I have to confess, class, that is the message that I need to hear most. The last time that I worried about my own mortality, my own death, I was 25 years old. I was a student at Yale Divinity School. I built a fire in the little fireplace in the apartment where Diane and I were living, and I sat in front of that fire and looked into it and thought sad thoughts. That was the last time that I've worried about my own mortality. But what does bother me now, what is a cause of concern, is the thought that I might be separated from those whom I love so much, from Diane and my boys, from that sweet little granddaughter, Anna. And that's what I need to hear. That's the message of the Christian gospel. We will be together with those whom we have lost. Joan, I can see that my time has run out. Once again, I have talked too long. I'll try not to do this. I'll try so hard next week. Please come back Next week, we will turn our attention to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And we will try to go deeper into not only the mystery of death, but also the meaning of the resurrection. What does the resurrection mean? What did it mean to the first Christians? What does it mean to us 2,000 years later? Thanks so much to everyone who came today. Thanks for those who stepped forward to ask questions and make comments. Please bring others back with you next week. Thank you, Joan. Thanks to everyone there.